Hi and welcome to Katrina's Creations. This is my Wednesday episode where it is a tutorial today, and yes, I'm wearing the same sweater that I seem to always be wearing when I do a tutorial. Maybe that's because it's Saturday. I don't know. Anyway, today's topic is going to be on gauge, why it's important, why we use it, and the purpose behind gauge and fitting your garments. So if you're knitting or crocheting a pattern for an afghan or a blanket, anything like that, gauge isn't as much of an issue. But if you are making clothing, you want to make sure it fits, and that's where gauge comes in. So I'm going to be demonstrating this using a pattern that I am currently knitting for a sweater, and that is the Flax Light by Tin Can Knits. This is a free pattern over on Ravelry. And if you look at the pattern here, this is all the different sizes. And it gives you the measurements next to here for your body, so you can decide that you are making the proper size for your particular body size. Now, right below that, where it tells you what you need, it's going to give you a gauge right here. Now, according to this pattern, if you knit a 4x4 swatch, little square, it should measure 24 stitches wide and 32 rounds or 32 rows tall for a 4-inch, and it tells you usually which pattern to do it in. You usually, if you're making a sweater, want to do the swatch in whatever pattern the main section or body of the sweater is in. In this case, it's in stockinette. This same formula works for crochet as well. Most crochet patterns where you're crocheting a garment are also going to have a gauge of how many stitches per inch and how many rows per inch you should get. And their sizing for that garment is based on that particular gauge. So before you start and spend the time to make something, you want to make sure that your gauge matches the gauge that the pattern is for. So let's get started, and I'll show you how mine stacks up and how I would change it if I wanted to change yarns but knit the same sweater. So let's get started. So here's my sweater, and this is a ruler that's really kind of neat. It folds up, and this was given to me by a viewer. So Lucy, if you're watching, thank you so much. I use it all the time. Now let's see how we did with our gauge. I'm going to move the camera a little bit closer so you can see this. All right, we're going to measure between the 5 and the 6. And I'm going to count the stitches between the 5 and the 6. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I am getting 6 stitches to the inch. Now let's check my height. I'm going to measure between the 2 and the 3, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 stitches, or 8 rows within an inch, and 6 stitches per inch, which is exactly what the pattern calls for, because 24 inches in a 4-inch wide swatch would be 6 stitches for each of the 4 inches. And for 32 rows tall in 4 inches, you would divide 4 into the 36, and you would get 8, and that's exactly to gauge. So this way, when I knit this sweater, as long as I keep my gauge, what the gauge of the sweater is, it will come out perfect in size. Now let's look at something if I wanted to change things a little bit, and say I wanted to make this sweater in a different weight of yarn. This is knit in a fingering weight yarn. So let's say I wanted to knit this, but I wanted to do it in a worsted weight. Let's look at the difference. Here we have a worsted weight yarn, which is heavier, and I'm going to knit this with a larger needle. The sweater in the fingering weight is being knit with a size 5, but worsted weight is normally knit with about a size 8 knitting needle. It would also be going up if you were crocheting, it would be a larger crochet hook. So let's count how many stitches I have per inch for this. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 4 stitches per inch as opposed to the 6 stitches, which is what the pattern calls for. Now let's check the rows. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have 6 rows, so it's basically 2 stitches difference than what the pattern calls for. So what that's going to mean is instead of casting on the number of stitches that they call for, if I'm going to raise this up, I'm going to have to adjust that. So say I'm knitting a sweater that's going to be a total of 30 inches around, like it's a child sweater, and it's because you're knitting this in the round, you're knitting the front and the back at the same time. If I'm casting on a stitch, or if I'm casting on a sweater for 30 inches based on their pattern, I'm going to be knitting the body of the sweater would be 6 stitches times 30, which would be, I would be casting 180 stitches on. But if I'm doing it in worsted, I'm going to be multiplying those 30 inches by 4 instead of by 6. So I would be casting on 120 stitches instead of the 180 stitches. So, and it's also going to take less rows this way to create the same sweater. So it involves a little bit of math, but you can change the gauge, you can change the weight of yarn you're using and still make the same sweater, but it does take a little bit of math, and you would have to remember to use that same math to apply it to the sleeves, the collars, every single piece of that sweater you would have to rethink, but it is a possible thing to do. Now let's look if you decided to go down in size. This is a lace weight. Now I cannot imagine anybody ever wanting to make a sweater in lace weight yarn, but if you did, counting the stitches from 1 inch across to the other with lace weight, and these needles that I used are a size US 1. So in order to knit across, it's actually 9 stitches, so it's 3 stitches more than what the gauge is. So again, doing the pattern for 30 inches, I would have to cast on 270 stitches to get the same size as what I would for the fingering or to do it in the worsted weight. So it is just a matter of a math equation. Now some people have said, could you knit using, or crochet even, using thinner thread, but using the needle that it required? Let me show you what that would look like. This is knit in garter stitch. It is the exact same crochet thread as this, but this is knit on a size US 1, so it is something that's more dense. You can't see through it. If you were going to make a garment out of it, you would want about this size of a needle or hook to do this with. Or if you were making something lacy like a beach cover-up or a shawl, using the same yarn, you can see my hand through this very easily, but you can see the stitches are much more open because I've used a bigger needle to do that with. And the same would apply to a crochet hook. So if I was going to make a sweater and it was going to be see-through, but I wanted it to be with a larger size needle in order to make it the see-through, in this case, I have about 6 stitches per inch. However, it's not something I would wear without something underneath, where this with 9 I could wear with nothing underneath because you can't see through it. So I hope you found this little short discussion on changing yarn weights in order to still maintain gauge and the importance of gauge helpful? If you have, please give it a thumbs up, and I will see you on Saturday. Thanks again for watching, everybody.